Hello, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Happy to have you with us across all video platforms as we get ready to get today's show started. We're busy. It's John Stinchcomb coming up. Always enjoy that conversation. We'll also look back on what was the first scrimmage of the spring. I think it's first for Georgia on Saturday. Some rumors coming out of that. We'll address some of those. Some comments from Kirby Smart, which I think set us up to have a fun discussion of the Georgia quarterback situation. You got three really good prospects at the quarterback spot competing to be the starter. We'll talk about that, and a incoming freshman continuing to earn some buzz. We'll cover some of that there as well. As you can tell, we are fully loaded and excited about being here. It's a great Monday, even though it's raining outside. We're going to have a great time in here. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So there's obviously always a lot to talk about as it relates to Georgia football, and this spring practice much the same way. Plenty of subject lines and narratives and storylines, things like that you can address, plot points if you will. But ultimately, kind of always comes back to quarterback. In football, there's no position more important than quarterback. And at Georgia, the quarterback competition here right now may be even more interesting because last year started, and the start of the last couple of years, Stetson Bennett obviously led the Bulldogs, helped lead the Bulldogs to 2 straight national championships. So that creates a scenario at Georgia where there are big shoes to fill. But also the 3 guys in this competition, Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton, for all their various reasons, are also really intriguing in that, in the case of Carson, he's been here for a while. That means that a lot of fans have been really curious about exactly what Georgia has in Carson Beck, maybe thinking at one point in time he might have even gotten a chance to play a little bit more than he has, but nonetheless, the fact that he's been patient, waited it out, the fact that when you see these videos pop up of him, he always looks like he has good zip throwing the football, kind of looks the part of being a quarterback. He's got his fans. And then you got guys like Brock Vandagriff, who, former 5-star. That's a very big recruiting ranking, and that hype and praise coming into Georgia has also created a level of intrigue about what exactly would an offense look like here at UGA if Brock Vandagriff got a chance to lead that. And Gunnar Stockton, much the same way, a guy that a lot of us saw in a distinguished career, record-setting quarterback in many ways, a guy who kind of has a combination of skills, both physical running style, obviously prolific passing stats, going back to his time at Rabun County, and also a guy that just sort of seems to have some comfort there at Georgia. That's another guy that I think has a very interesting future ahead of him at UGA. So you've got a situation where quarterback's important. Previous quarterback probably leaves as the most decorated player in UGA program history, and then 3 guys who, for their own reasons, have their own fans and their own level of optimism about what they could do if they are the next in line here at UGA. So with that in mind, everything that Kirby Smart says about quarterback is really interesting. So for a couple of minutes here, coming off a scrimmage on Saturday where Georgia kind of got together behind closed doors and did something that looked like real football, let's hear a little bit about what Kirby Smart thinks about these quarterbacks here right now. And what this eventually builds to is something I think if you're a UGA fan ought to be good news for you about your opportunity to see what's actually going on here. But let's sort of work our way to that first. Here is what Kirby Smart said fresh off that scrimmage on Saturday that he saw about what he sees taking place with this quarterback competition here right now.
I can think of really good things each one did, and I can think of really poor things each one did. So it's not like one guy sticking out. Carson has really good command of the offense. He understands it inside and out. He communicates it. He gets things correct. He had a couple poor decisions and choices today, but he also made some plays. He made some really good throws. He's got really good presence in the pocket to move around. Brock made some plays. He made some plays getting out of the pocket, made some good throws. He had a couple downfield throws. I think he wish he had back. Give us a chance in some 50-50 situations and keep the ball in bounds with that. But he did a really good job in 2 minutes. And then Gunnar made some plays. Gunnar made some plays with his feet. He's still like the administration of the offense of getting everybody lined up, getting going, getting the call in, which is not all on him, but he's growing and getting better. He made some nice throws. So I'm gonna keep repeating myself, but we got 3 pretty good quarterbacks, and they've grown, each one of them, and they're all three different in their own ways.
So Christy on YouTube pointing out there's a lot of room noise there. Sometimes you just sort of have that creep in. That's from the press conference. That's not from me. Sometimes you just sort of have that around there. Those are sports writers tap, 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 tap on those keyboards and typewriters or whatever it is they're using these days. So you definitely hear some of that. But you also hopefully were able to make out what Kirby Smart was saying there on the quarterback situation. And obviously, one of the things that kind of comes up here is Carson Beck. And you can read more about this at DawgNation.com. I guess some of the rumors coming out of the actual performance were that Carson Beck threw some interceptions, and as Kirby Smart said, made some bad decisions. And I get that. And obviously, if you want to help lead Georgia to a third straight national championship as a quarterback, you've got to avoid those mistakes, and that is certainly true. But as you know, simply avoiding mistakes is not enough, because there's a way to avoid mistakes. There's a way to play mistake-free football that also doesn't give your team much of a chance to win. So in terms of Carson Beck here, what's being kind of reported, what's kind of being whispered as, late in the scrimmage or whatever the verbiage is here, late in the scrimmage, he threw some interceptions. Smart said made some bad decisions, whatever else. Let's not make too much of that, I would say, because the other thing you hear from Kirby is he also made some plays. And ultimately, quarterback becomes this situation where it's not just about avoiding mistakes. It's also about having enough of that gunslinger mentality that you're willing to make the big throw, that you're willing to put the football into a tight window. There's a certain level of bravery that you expect a quarterback to have here. And it sounds like, in this case, Beck may have done some things he shouldn't have done while also doing plenty of the kind of playmaking things you need a quarterback to be able to do. So the one thing we're not going to do here is make too much over the fact that I guess there were some interceptions from Beck on Saturday as being reported from people who were there, being whispered about from people who were there. We're not going to make too big of a deal about that, because obviously the thing that you want is your quarterback to make plays, and it sounds like Beck was doing some of that. But, of course, if you're going to really wrestle away this competition and become the starter, he's obviously going to have to limit that eventually. We know that. But you're also going to judge him on what he does do, not on what he, doesn't do. That's going to be a big part of that. But then Kirby went in to talk more about the quarterback situation, specifically about how maybe his evaluation of all this has changed, or if there's something that he kind of thinks about this situation now that he didn't think when all this started. Kirby would talk a little bit more about the evolution of this competition as spring practice kind of rolled on. Here is Kirby Smart plus the keyboards one more time.
I don't think the dynamics have changed. Brock and Carson are both getting reps with the ones. Gunner got some reps with the twos, predominantly threes, but our threes are in a better state. There's times when you've had your threes, they couldn't function. This three group has really good skill players in it. We're not used to having this many wide receivers on our three, so he has some good guys to throw to. The offensive line with the threes has some experience, has a couple walk-ons. So it's like it functions so you can evaluate Gunner better, where there's not always a chance to do that with the threes. But I can't sit and say that the dynamic has changed in any way, shape, or form. I think we'll evaluate this scrimmage and come back in Monday and be able to say, okay, what did they do well or poorly with no coach on the field? It's still a tough evaluation, because there's probably 10 plays out there in the scrimmage where I have to say a guy got sacked. Well, did he get sacked or did he not get sacked? Because we didn't tackle him. So you give the benefit of the doubt to the defensive player that's standing there unblocked, but they actually have to get him on the ground. And until you tackle a guy live, what we're not going to do. It's not going to give you a true evaluation.
One of those sports writers is an angry typer. Did y'all hear that? Boom, boom, boom. What did that keyboard do to you? I don't know if that's Mike Griffith or whoever that is, but somebody's an angry typer in that situation. But as far as what Kirby Smart had to say, if you'll remember, there was a time a couple of weeks ago where I asked the question, and you may remember this. I asked, at any point in this spring, will Kirby Smart say something definitive about quarterback? Because obviously I think for those of you who kind of follow this stuff kind of closely, your intuition is to assume that Kirby Smart's going to play it like right down the middle, and he's going to just, give as little as possible in this quarterback discussion. You would assume that Kirby Smart wants everybody to sort of feel like they're in it, doesn't want to reveal any details at all, that he's going to be as generic as he possibly can be. And what I said was, and that may be how Kirby Smart does this, but a couple of weeks ago I also said, there's a chance, though, that he doesn't. There's a chance, though, that he does choose to reveal something, because we have seen coaches from time to time, they do sometimes willingly reveal some sort of information about the quarterback, their various quarterback competitions. Well, in this particular case, I think we can now say that Kirby Smart has revealed something specific, reiterating in that particular clip you just heard something he also said to start spring practice. That there is right now separation between Brock Vandagriff and Carson Beck kind of in one category, and Gunnar Stockton kind of in a separate category. Now, that's not to say that Gunnar Stockton may not one day be, greatest quarterback in Georgia history. That obviously still is a possibility for him. I'm saying that his future is still very bright, but as of right now, you are led to believe that Gunnar Stockton is in a category underneath Brock Vandagriff and Carson Beck. And while Georgia believes it has three really good quarterbacks, right now the competition to be the starter would seem to be between Brock Vandagriff and Carson Beck. So that is a specific piece of information that I believe that Kirby Smart has given you, and he's now reiterated that a couple of times here, so I think you got to take that seriously. And for me, I would say one of the most interesting things that I have kind of read into what's been happening for Georgia this spring is what I'll describe a little bit as the emergence of Brock Vandagriff, because I think a lot of us would have said coming into the spring, this is the guy that we maybe felt like we knew the least about. Obviously, you remember his profile as a high school player, former five-star, but as we've said many times, his role last season at Georgia was just not quite as defined. Carson Beck was the number 2 quarterback. If Bennett had gotten hurt, Beck would have gone in. Gunnar Stockton was the scout team quarterback. Gunnar was making a name for himself battling against the great Georgia defense. In the case of Brock Vandagriff as the number 3 quarterback, his role just a little bit less defined. Our understanding of what he was as a player, a little bit less, I guess, fully filled out. It had been a couple of years removed since he kind of had that 5-star label coming out of high school, and there is a sense in which a guy becomes a little bit out of sight, out of mind. Well, the fact that Vandagriff seemingly kind of holding his own in this competition right now with with Carson Beck would lead you to believe that, hey, it's been a pretty good spring for Vandagriff. And for a lot of fans who kind of wonder, what exactly does Georgia have in Vandagriff? And, how close is this guy to sort of the typical expectation you would have for a 5-star coming out of high school? Well, it sounds like right now Vandagriff is kind of doing okay, and Vandagriff seemingly kind of making a little bit of a name for himself during these Georgia practices. That's not to say that I believe that Vandagriff is going to overtake Carson Beck, the guy we believe to be the leader in this competition, the most likely starter. But it does certainly speak to the fact that it is a real competition, and the presence of Vandagriff makes that so. So I think that's kind of interesting. And here's the good news, and this is kind of what we're all this sort of building to, is that we can hear second and third hand information from what so-and-so saw at a scrimmage, and then he told so-and-so, and then so-and-so texted it to so-and-so, and then so-and-so put it on social media. We can do that kind of thing, and obviously we're all interested in that. Let's not pretend we're not. But eventually, on G-Day, April 15th, whether you're tuning in to watch it on ESPN, is it ESPN2? You're tuning in to watch it on TV, or you're going to actually be there in Sanford Stadium. The good news is that we'll get a chance to see this with our own eyes. And that's what's going to be fun here, is we get a chance to make an evaluation. And based on what Kirby Smart says that he's looking for from these quarterbacks, right now Vandagriff versus Beck, based on what Kirby Smart says he's looking for from these quarterbacks, we can actually make a pretty educated evaluation of this ourselves. So here is Kirby Smart again on the topic of quarterbacks, what he wants to see from these guys, and we ourselves will get a chance to see this coming up in just a couple of weeks. So here's Kirby one more time on quarterback.
Demeanor and communication. So, I can get the stats, but it's like a true quarterback is a decision maker. In our system, because some systems take all the pressure off the quarterback and they just go really fast, we don't do that. We're a quarterback-driven offense. So can you process the information? That means get the signal, get people lined up, then see what the defense is in and figure out, are we in the right situation? Which of these 3 choices Coach Bobo's given me am I going to utilize on this play? And then the play happens, and there might be a mistake or a breakdown, and you not go full metal jacket and have catastrophe mode and put us in a bad situation. So, decision making is the number one thing I want to see at the quarterback position. Can you make consecutive decisions over and over that don't cost our team games? Because we have enough playmakers and we have enough plays that you will make a play inevitably. Don't make a bonehead play. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
The reference to Full Metal Jacket's obviously a very interesting thing. Hopefully none of these quarterbacks start talking to the football and end up getting Section 8'd. Hopefully none of that ends up happening with any of these guys. But the point here is this, is that Kirby Smart says, hey, I'm looking for demeanor, I'm looking for decision-making. Now, let me tell you what I like about this type of thing, is that at its essence, football, I believe, is a very complicated sport. You got 22 guys on the field. You got 1,000 different things that kind of go into whether or not a play is successful or whether or not a defense can prevent a play from being successful. You've got so many things going on, and football, if you allow it to, can be really, really complicated. But anytime that football can be simplified, I just think it makes the conversation more enjoyable. And what Kirby Smart does right there is he kind of simplifies the conversation happening around quarterback. Hey, what kind of decisions does this guy make? What kind of demeanor does this guy have? And I would sort of whittle that down to a phrase I actually used a couple of moments ago, which is, does my quarterback look the part? Does he walk out there and does he have the kind of swagger you expect a quarterback to have? Does he stand there in the huddle when Georgia chooses to huddle? And does he have command over the other 10 guys on the field? And then does the offense have a rhythm and a hum to it? And we can all see this on G-Day. When Vandegrift's out there, is the offense moving? Are plays being made? Is Georgia scoring touchdowns? Carson Beck, kind of the same type of thing. Going up against a good Georgia defense on G-Day, hey, is Georgia allowing the playmakers to do what they're capable of doing? Is the quarterback kind of creating a situation which Georgia is functioning well offensively? And frankly, you don't have to be inside that huddle, or you don't have to be a former coach or former player to have an evaluation of that. You can see that with your own eyes. So to me, that's the really good thing about G-Day coming up, is that Kirby Smart sort of setting parameters on this quarterback competition that we can all fairly well judge and have our own evaluation with. And it sounds like right now both Carson Beck and Brock Vandegrift are having their moments. And obviously it sounds like Gunnar Stockton is a really good prospect waiting the wings. But for now, the battle to be starters seems to be between Vandegrift and Beck. And while Beck is the favorite, he may not be the overwhelming favorite. And Brock Vandegrift may be having some moments of his own to kind of push himself into this discussion. And who knows how all this plays out. Maybe it plays out as expected with Beck winning. Maybe eventually it becomes a Vandegrift surprise. But either way, with our own eyes on April 15th, we all get a chance to see exactly what's going on for UGA at the quarterback spot. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Pella, Window and Door of Georgia, and we're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us live on video. We start at 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and available as a podcast wherever you find them. The Apple Player, Spotify, world-famous DawgNation.com. We try to put the podcast out there as many different places we can to be a part of with all of you. And we're certainly so happy for you for being a part of that here with us. And by the way, a big thanks to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible there as well. They can equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. So on a day like this where it's kind of rainy and maybe a little bit windy, if you've got poorly fitted windows or improper doors, if you've got something that's kind of old and sort of, past its shelf life, well, all of a sudden some of that wind, some of that water, some of that residue from outside going to creep into your house on the inside, and that makes you not feel too comfortable. Anytime you walk around your home, especially in the wintertime or something like that, you sort of feel that draft. You're going to realize, there's a little too much inside right now. Well, Pella windows and doors prevent all of that. And in survey after survey, year after year, the Pella windows have been recognized, the Pella doors have been recognized as a real market leader for people who obviously love their home and want to do the best they can to kind of present their home in the best light, meaning, good looking curb appeal, feeling good on the inside. That's where Pella windows and doors have been kind of viewed to be the best for quite some time. And you can kind of take advantage of this yourself and learn more about this when you talk to one of those Pella experts. You can sit down for no pressure consultation. This is not a sales thing. This is just a education thing, kind of teaching you what the Pella product is all about and your installation options and your, in many cases, financing options. That's what you're interested in. The entire product line, you can talk to one of those Pella experts and get everything you need to know about that. Stop by and see them at their Experience Center there in Duluth, or reach out online at PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. Or give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. You could even take advantage of great savings right now as well, because between now and May 22nd, you can get 10% off your entire project or 0% APR for 24 months. Once again, PellaofGA.com/DawgNation, or give them a call, 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. We are going to get John Stinchcomb here coming up in just a couple of minutes. A lot to talk to with John about. We'll do some of the quarterback stuff with him as a player himself. What is John looking at when he looks at these Georgia quarterbacks when he gets a chance to see them? We'll do some of that with John here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let us go around the DawgHouse. And Another one of these kind of whispers and rumors that comes out of Georgia spring practice that I find to be kind of interesting right now is the seeming emergence of an incoming freshman who's already earning a little bit of buzz. It's freshman tight end Lawson Luckie. Now, you may have kind of heard this from your folks who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, or you may have noticed other people kind of talking about this on social media. Specifically, what is the buzz related to? Let me read you a quote here. Mike Griffith had this at DawgNation.com over the weekend from this scrimmage. Mike, his source is telling him that freshman tight end Lawson Luckie continued to open eyes, scoring 2 touchdowns on catch-and-run plays. Luckie is also considered a physical blocker, so he does indeed have the profile of an impact player at the position. That's Mike Griffith reporting, or at least hearing from reports from those who were at that scrimmage on Saturday, once again saying good things about Lawson Luckie. This is not the only time that's happened thus far this spring. It certainly sounds like Lawson Luckie has had himself a very good spring. Now, here's the weird thing about spring practice. Let's just be honest about this for a moment. So when a guy like Luckie earns praise, the first thing that you kind of go to is, well, is this a good thing or not a good thing? Because if Luckie's doing well, does that mean, like, say, the defensive players who are battling Luckie, does that mean they're not doing very well? And you'll hear Kirby Smart more on that topic coming up in just a moment. Or you may sort of think, well, if Lawson Luckie is emerging here, does that mean a guy that is a year ahead of him in kind of the seniority chart, does that mean that Oscar Delp is faltering if a guy like Lawson Luckie is emerging? What's exactly going on here? Well, in this particular case, I don't think this is like a zero-sum thing. I don't think it's an either-or thing. In this particular case, I don't think that the emergence of Lawson Luckie, if it is indeed happening, whispers say that it is, I don't think that's coming necessarily at the expense of Oscar Delp. And the reason why I am led to believe that's not the case is because Kirby Smart on Saturday did have some nice things to say about Delp and how Delp is contributing there as a tight end. Now, the backdrop to all of this is that Darnell Washington isn't here anymore. And while Darnell didn't always touch the football as much as some Georgia fans wanted him to, certainly, well-educated UGA fans certainly know that there was really no more important person for this Georgia offense last season than Washington because of how effective he was as a blocker and at times catching the football too. But Darnell was truly an elite blocker, and that extra, in some cases, almost functioned like an extra offensive tackle, allowed Georgia just to maul people at times. And one of the reasons why Georgia was so dominant offensively the last couple of years, a lot of the credit for that goes to Washington. Well, now he isn't here anymore, so trying to figure out, what happens next at tight end to go along with Brock Bowers, obviously, what happens next at tight end, that's kind of a big topic. And you're hearing rumors that Lawson Luckie's doing very well, but Kirby Smart said that Oscar Delp is also doing pretty well too. This is Smart on the subject of Delp and the tight ends from Saturday.
Yeah, it's not the same. We don't have that, same mass and movement, and it doesn't just affect the run game; it affects the play-action pass game. Because where Darnell was elite was, he could block you, he could go on the perimeter and block you, he could get vertical on a play-action. But when we max protect, he was like having an extra lineman in, and Oscar's doing that, and Oscar's been a pleasant surprise blocking this spring. He's come so far. It's like you don't know how much Oscar got better versus who's the people he's blocking, because he's not blocking Robert Beal and Nolan. He's blocking Gabe, Sam, CJ, and even Chaz. But Oscar's done a good job when he's gone against Trammell and Michael while he was out there, and Ty. So I like the competition at tight end, but we don't have the depth, especially with Pierce out, that we need.
I don't get a chance to go to Georgia practice every time media has availability. I don't live in Athens. I'm always in this box. I'm always in the studio doing this show. I don't get a chance to do that very much. But when I did go to a Georgia practice last summer, one of the things that stood out to me is the fact that even as a freshman back then, Delp just looked a little bit bigger than I expected him to. He kind of, he has sort of a noticeable size, even amongst a lot of Georgia players who are obviously very big in their own right. Delp's size was noticeable. So Kirby Smart says that his blocking this spring has been, a pleasant surprise. That's not the kind of compliment that Kirby Smart would throw around lightly. He wouldn't say that if he didn't mean it. So that leads you to believe that Oscar Delp is also kind of holding his own right now. And as Georgia tries to figure out how it's going to replace Darnell Washington, it sounds like Delp is a big part of that. It's not just Kirby Smart who's saying that. Let's go back to last week on our show. Jake Fromm, the great former Georgia quarterback, who obviously spends as much time around this Georgia program as he can, he also had some nice things to say about Oscar Delp too. And I take the words of Jake pretty seriously here. He's earned a lot of credibility with some of his recent comments on our show. This is what Jake said last week about Oscar Delp.
I mean, honestly, I'm expecting pretty big things out of him. I mean, he's a good-looking kid. He's got a good frame, good ball skills. I've seen him, last camp make some plays. And so, I mean, why should we expect, honestly, any drop-off?
Yeah.
Because of the way they recruit and the way they develop guys. And anytime he had an opportunity late in the season, during the SEC Championship, during the playoff games in the Natty, I mean, he came in, did well, blocked well. So expecting big things out of him. Obviously, he has really big shoes to fill. But, I mean, this is a good group. They recruit well. And I do think, depending on how well he plays and how he does, we can see a lot of 12 and a lot of the same schemes that we saw last year.
So let me kind of sum all this up this way. It sounds like Lawson Luckie, incoming freshman, getting a lot of buzz right now, and seemingly justifiably so, based on how he's performing at practice, so we've been told. But that emergence of Luckie does not seem to be coming at the expense of Delp. He seems to also be getting his own share of praise here as well. The bottom line is a position for Georgia that's been laughably deep for many years now would seem to be still the same way for the upcoming season here too. Brock Bowers may be the very best player in the country, and then opposite Bowers, when Georgia wants to go to two tight end sets, you've got a guy like Delp ready to come into his own. You got a guy like Luckie ready to show what his buzz is all about there as well. That Georgia, who has recruited that tight end position so well, once again, the fruits of all that labor going to be on display on the field here later on this fall. That is Around the DawgHouse, and here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia here today. Fun look at the tight end situation and a freshman who's kind of popping and a second-year player ready for his moment in the sun there as well. And we'll kind of keep this conversation going throughout the next few days. Also, before we're done, speaking of Brock Bowers, there's a handful of Georgia players already earning some buzz for the upcoming season. National award type stuff. We'll do some of that before we're done here today. But for now, on everything else happening around UGA spring practice, the quarterback competition, and the stuff happening around that there too. Let's do all of that and have that discussion with John Stinchcomb here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always great to be able to talk to John Stinchcomb here on a Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. John, before you're joining us, we're talking about quarterback, and it certainly seems like right now Carson Beck, Brock Vandegrift in a good competition with each other. And as a guy who played in the NFL, a guy who had great success here at UGA, what are you looking for when you see quarterback? Kirby talked about demeanor, decision making. What I take that in, to mean is that with your own eyes, you should be able to look at a quarterback, and that guy kind of looks like a quarterback. So what are you kind of looking for there in that? And on April 15th, in particular, when these quarterbacks are on display on G-Day, what will you be looking to see then?
Yeah, I think you're looking for a conductor. I think you're looking for somebody who gets everybody on the same page, and it looks like a symphony at work, that the quarterback has everybody in the right spot and in the right place, and he makes the right decisions. And for a guy like Beck, who's been a part of the program for as long as he has, I think the expectations are high. And for anybody who's replacing a two-time national championship winning quarterback, the expectations are going to be high. But I think Carson's got, I think we all do at this point, think he's got the inside track, and the expectations for him to be able to get people lined up, get them in the right situation, make the right checks, is higher than what you would probably expect from somebody like Gunner. Now, for Brock, I think he's still he's that X factor for me. He's the guy who you want to see. Can he challenge Carson? Is it truly a quarterback battle, or is it something where, as long as Beck doesn't truly screw it up, that it's his to lose? So I think if Brock can go out there and continue to have a good spring, that there really is a quarterback battle that hopefully is beneficial for both players, but ultimately for this Georgia offense.
There's been some chatter that maybe, Beck had a couple of interceptions on Saturday. Kirby Smart talked about, improved decision-making from him in particular. And one of the things I said before you joined us is I want to be careful not to make too much of that, because while avoiding mistakes is clearly a big part of the quarterback position, there's a way to play avoid mistakes football that makes you less dynamic than you need to be, because ultimately the quarterback position in a place like Georgia, because you are trying to win national championships, keep that streak of championships going, you've also got to be able to make plays there as well. And so it sounds like, from Kirby's own words on Saturday, that while Beck may have tried a little too hard to make something happen a couple of times, certainly he kind of made some plays there too. And, to me, that willingness to throw it into a tight window, that willingness to try to make something happen, there are some quarterbacks who just don't have that, that willingness to kind of go out there and sort of put the football in harm's way if need be because you're trying to make something happen. And so it sounds like on the one hand, Beck is, out there trying to make plays and in some cases actually making them. And so I'll take the good with the bad for it with him right now as he kind of gets acclimated to this potentially new role. Does that make sense?
It does. And you know what? The expectations and the ceiling and the bar has been set high. And what you want from this quarterback is the ability to look at a tight window and not shy away from it. But also, you got to protect the football. So it may sound duplicitous or like double talk where you're saying, hey, I want a guy who's willing to throw it into tight windows, and in the same breath say, but I don't want him to make those boneheaded decisions where he's forcing it and it turns into turnovers. And so trying to find that balance of, is this an opportunity that I can take advantage of, or do I need to make the smart play and work my way through the progression and go to the check down? That's part of the evaluation process. And there are times where, not everybody in college football is going to have 3 yards of separation. Can you put the ball exactly where it needs to be in a tight window at the right time? And if it's not there, can you progress through your progression? And, it's a challenge. And as a armchair quarterback, for a lot of us, you go, he shouldn't have made that throw, or I don't know why he didn't, smoke it in there and find that small window when it opened. And it's a lot easier from the seats that we currently hold, but it doesn't change that's the expectation that these guys can make those decisions in split seconds and put the ball where it needs to be.
There's one more thing on quarterback that I want to make sure that people don't miss here, and I mentioned this a moment ago as well. Kirby Smart, doesn't have an obligation to reveal anything about this, but has chosen to be at least a little bit candid from the standpoint that Gunnar Stockton, who may have a very bright future, I believe he probably does. I think that Gunnar Stockton's going to one day be the starting quarterback at Georgia at some point in time in the future. But for now, it seems like there's a little bit of separation between guys who've been here longer. Brock and Carson compared to Gunnar. And I think that's kind of an interesting, revelation. I don't think it speaks poorly of Stockton at all. I think it just sort of speaks, well of maybe the experience in the program that Vandegrift and Beck have gotten, even if they weren't playing as much as they wanted to. And so from that standpoint, John, I do think it's interesting that Smart has at least been willing to reveal this. This isn't some even competition between three guys. It's two guys mostly competing with the 1 reps, and a guy like Stockton trying to show you what he's all about with some number 3 reps. And as Kirby Smart said, hey, those number 3 reps at a place like Georgia are still pretty significant. That's a pretty significant level of football being played there. But that level of candor from Smart, I think, is somewhat valuable. I don't think we should miss out on the fact that Smart has actually revealed more than maybe he had to. He's certainly not obligated to even reveal that, but he's at least revealed that much.
Which is somewhat uncharacteristic, right? I mean, for a number of weeks, especially 2 years ago, we're trying to figure out, what's the quarterback situation for the week, and when Stetson didn't have that firm grip on the position, and we're going, well, is JT Daniels coming back and all those things. So for him to actually be more informative than required is almost out of character. So I'm appreciative of it, but when you're evaluating these guys, it's not a condemnation of Gunnar Stockton's abilities. I think his physical abilities and his attributes as a quarterback is not in question. I think that the separation comes with the familiarity with the system and being in that position to get guys lined up and understand why decisions need to be made and the checks that need to be called and where you're supposed to go with the ball. Not, can he make these throws? Can he create with his feet? Can he move the pocket? All things that I'm sure Gunnar can excel at. But being able to put those into place and knowing when to pull out the right tools at the right time is something that takes time. It's different from other positions where, based on your raw skill set, we can create situations for you to succeed. And I think they could do that, but at quarterback specifically, What you need is a guy that can get everyone else in the situation for them to succeed and then make sure that the ball gets where it's supposed to go. So the expectations at quarterback are a little bit higher and a little different than other position groups. And so, it's harder for guys that may have the attributes, physical attributes, to succeed, to get out there early and be able to execute the offense at a high level.
I think we've talked about this before, but once again on Saturday, based on what Kirby Smart said, we had a continuation of this battle between Austin Blaske and Ernest Green to be a starter at offensive tackle for Georgia this year. And, I guess, John, I'm somewhat agnostic about who eventually wins it between Green and Blaske, but the fact that it's as intense as it has been as a Georgia fan, I think I'd take that as really good news, because one way or another, I think it kind of proves that the Georgia offensive line may be a little deeper than I expected it would be. I sort of felt like Georgia's going to likely have two very good starters at tackle, and I guess I probably had Ernest Green rubber stamped as one of those starters because of the fact that he was such a highly rated recruit coming out. Blaske probably wasn't really on my radar, but the fact that he's made this a real fair fight competition with Green and may actually even win it, I guess if it was ended today, he might be the winner. It has sort of proven that Georgia's got actually a little bit more tackle depth than I realized. So, John, ultimately, whoever wins this thing, the fact that the competition is as intense as it is, I take that to be pretty good news for Georgia. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's great news for Georgia, and it's also a recognition of the world we live in. Now Georgia is expected 15-plus games in a year, right?
Yeah,
so you look back and historically at the position, if you have three guys, not only is it a safe bet that you feel comfortable with, but it's a needed preparation standpoint where all three are probably going to play. Back when Sawyer was kind of a guard tackle, and all of a sudden he's the tackle, and then Broderick became that third tackle behind Jamari and Warren, and then this past year with Amarius Mims, who got plenty of snaps. And so I think it's no longer just a luxury to have three tackles that are highly capable. It's almost a necessity when you play as many games as Georgia expects to going into a season, postseason play included, that there's not a drop-off there. And I think it's a credit to Blaske that, did not come in with the herald that others did. And I truly believe that Ernest Green might have one of the highest ceilings of any of the tackles, barring maybe Andrew Thomas, from these past few years. So the future for him is very bright. But to Blaske's credit, he's been a guy that's come in and earned the respect and earned the opportunity to be in this conversation, and highly talented in his own right, and has been performing throughout spring ball. And you look at this past season when they brought in, I don't want to call it mop-up duty, but you get the picture. When they came in, that second group of offensive linemen, he was one of the first to be in that sub-rotation. So it's something that's not new to the team. They're aware of what he's earned and the opportunities that he's given himself based on his performance in practice. All
right, in the time we have left, I'm going to try to be kind of brief and rapid fire with this. I want to get your thoughts on a few more of those sort of spring storylines that are out there right now. Obviously, Kendall Milton now out for the rest of the spring, hamstring injury, Dejan a little bit banged up with that there too. How concerned should you be, and not concerned at all is also a valid answer here, but how concerned should Georgia fans be about a little bit thinner situation at running back right now because the veteran guys are dealing with hamstring injuries?
Yeah, long-term, no concern. I mean, Dejan Edwards, and you get Milton back, and with the combination of everyone else, not a concern at all. Making sure that you make your way through spring without significant injuries that don't impact the season, I think is where your concern is. I think getting the Robinsons more reps in practice could be a really good thing. It lets them show what their value can be come fall. You just don't want anybody else to get hurt. And looking at the injuries that they've sustained, it's nothing that should impact or have long impact implications for the season.
Even the Mikael Williams foot thing, foot injuries are one of those things that kind of sort of remind you of some Georgia guys before we've kind of dealt with that a little bit. It sounds like in Mikael's case, once again, spring practice is one of those times where you can just sort of, use it as a luxury. A lot of very good Georgia players have not participated much during spring, going to have dominant seasons. You concerned about Mikel's foot at all?
No, I think that's another one where let's fix it now. If it's August and it's a foot injury, that's a problem. Now that it's, we just started April and we're on top of it, no longer as big a concern.
And then the other thing that seems to be coming out pretty consistently is the fact that Dominic Lovett, as a slot receiver, guy that put up big numbers at Missouri, it sounds like he's the real deal, John. So I guess two-part here. How excited does that make you about the idea that Georgia's adding a experienced SEC receiver that so far during the spring apparently has performed very well, and the, I guess, potential evolution that could mean for Georgia where you see more 3 receiver sets, less 2 tight end sets, because obviously you got to kind of make a choice between, your second tight end, your third receiver, sometimes when it comes to personnel on the field. What do you think about that as a topic just in general, that Georgia may have enough of a receiving situation that it wants less tight ends on the field this upcoming year? Because, last couple of years, tight end's been the deepest position group the program had.
Yeah, I think the best thing an offense can do is highlight their strengths, and that's not novel. But this past year, because of the tight end strength, you saw so many more sets with 2 and 3 tight ends just because of the position group that was uniquely gifted. And with the 2 additions from the transfer portal, and it's funny, you talk about wide receivers, and not all are built and created the same, right? So Ra is a deep threat, stretches the field, creates opportunities for everybody else, and Lovett's a guy that we saw firsthand what he can do across the middle and his route running ability and quickness. So I think there are 2 guys that can really accentuate and help this position group kind of form an identity. And throughout spring, what we've heard from Lovett is that he is exactly what we thought he would be, and that playmaker that is more polished because of his experience in the SEC, and is going to be a big-time contributor. So it's going to be a quote-unquote new look offense, and part of that has to do with you don't have Darnell at tight end, but you do have other pieces that are highly capable and are skilled in their own right. And so finding ways to accentuate that is going to be Mike Bobo and the entire offensive staff's job. And what a great way to do it when you have the talent level that Georgia does.
John, I always appreciate this conversation. It's always so much fun each and every week to get your thoughts on Georgia football. We're getting closer to G-Day. At that point in time, we'll kind of find out about all these rumors and whispers we've heard, what do we actually see with our own eyes on April 15th. That's going to be so valuable. So we appreciate your time and helping us get ready for all of that. We'll look forward to getting a chance to hopefully do it with you again very soon as well.
Always enjoy it, B.A. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
It is good to be able to talk to John Stinchcomb here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia each week. I love it. John's got great insight, and also he's one of those guys that I think does a really good job of, kind of staying measured about all this. We're probably at times around here pretty given to emotion, really, really high, or maybe really, really low, depending on whatever might be going on. John just kind of keeps it between the banks. We certainly appreciate that with him. Always a great discussion with the former All-American. By the way, speaking of great things in store for Dog Nation coming up in just a couple of weeks there, as well as we'll be on board Independence of the Seas for the second ever cruise with Dog Nation. So many of you are a part of this, and I can't wait for it. Y'all, I think for those of you who were on it last year and also going to be on the second one coming up here in just a few weeks, I think you're going to be blown away by some of the things that we're going to be doing. Part of the thing that makes a Dog Nation cruise so fun is, hey, you got the great, food and entertainment and the stuff that makes a Royal Caribbean cruise famous, Independence of the Seas, going to Nassau, Bahamas, perfect day, Coco Cay. But this is more than just a Royal Caribbean cruise. This is a Dog Nation cruise. That means there's some special Dog Nation events that we're going to be doing that kind of take the experience to the next level. And I got to tell you, some of the meetings I've been a part of and some of the special folks who are kind of helping us out with this. Our staff this year is a little larger than it used to be. So we've got some creative folks, Casey, somebody you sometimes hear me talk about on our team, does a lot of our kind of graphic things and things like that. She's really kind of made this a great experience. It's going to be a wonderful time. Plus, the entire team from Royal Caribbean and Jessica Slater, everything's kind of working to make this a great cruise experience. We can't wait to have you with us for it. In fact, speaking of Jessica Slater, if you want to talk to her and say, hey, I want to be on the Dog Nation cruise, I was able to do that, but give me the next best thing. Get me on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship here for spring travel, summer travel, heading towards the fall. Jessica can do that for you. And give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Jessica will have you covered on all of that, whether it be on Independence of the Seas, Independence and Mariner of the Seas, ships like that. You can do like the 3-night, 4-night itinerary. The 3-night sailings typically take place over a weekend. The 4-night sailings, obviously, the Monday and coming back on a Friday. So that's a little bit shorter cruise for those of you who don't have as much time to devote. But if you're ready for the big 7-night sailing, you want the large Oasis class of ships like Wonder of the Seas, which I was on back in February, you can do that too. So lots of different lengths of trip, lots of different itineraries. You can explore all of that with Jessica Slater, a great travel agent, makes a wonderful Royal Caribbean cruise vacation even better, and Jessica is certainly one of those. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean right now. So Walter Camp has its preseason All-American list out right now, and what I think is interesting about this is that it kind of demonstrates that once again for Georgia, even though they're the overwhelming favorite to win the national championship this year, their actual path to the national championship is going to be a good bit similar to what it's been the last couple of years, where we say this all the time, that great teams are made up of great players. I know that sounds overly simplistic, overly elementary, but what I mean by that is that the teams that are propelled to national championships have a handful of elite, first-team All-SEC type, future first-round pick type players playing at a very high level that you have to have half dozen or so of those guys if you want to truly emerge at the national championship level. And we've seen those guys emerge for Georgia over the course of the last couple of seasons. But what's interesting is those names were not necessarily household names expected to be that level of player before the season began. And once again, even though Georgia's kind of the favorite in the national championship, you don't really see tons of, rubber-stamped, automatically assumed to be superstars among this Georgia team here right now. That'll emerge over the course of the next 15 games. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If you look at Walter Camp, who kind of gets involved in things like this, their preseason All-American list, there is just one Georgia player on the first-team offense. That's Brock Bowers. You're not surprised by that. And when you look at the second-team offense, there aren't any Georgia players in that list. So for a Georgia team that is back-to-back national champions, expect to win a third straight national championship, right now there is just one name from the offense who's getting All-America love. Now, if Georgia only has one All-American level player on its offense this season, they are not winning the national championship. They'll fall short of that in all likelihood. So what you get a chance to find out is, okay, well, who from this group then sort of emerges at that level? I think the easiest names to assume are guys like Amarius Mims. The world right now doesn't know Amarius Mims. Mims only started 2 games for Georgia last season. Even though he was an elite recruit, the fact of the matter is people sort of forget about elite recruits a couple of years after they graduate from high school. So Amarius Mims is one of those guys that people don't know now, but he's sort of probably the next in line for Georgia there at that spot. Cedric Von Granger at center. This is a guy that America, including the Walter Camp preseason folks here, they probably don't think a lot about Georgia center very much. But the truth is, a lot of you know this, Van Pran's decision to come back to Georgia this season was one of the biggest pieces of offseason news. That's a guy, I believe, who could very much play at an All-America level. We just talked about Dominic Lovett a moment ago. Could Lovett take the next step with his career? He'll certainly be playing with a better quarterback at Georgia than he was at Missouri. He could eclipse 1,000 yards. All of a sudden, that kind of puts him in sort of an All-American conversation. That, in other words, it's okay not to have preseason All-Americans, but we know that if Georgia's going to win the national championship, an All-American level player for Georgia, a handful of them are going to have to emerge, and I just gave you an example of some of those on offense who might do it. Let's look at the defense here for a moment. When you look at the SEC guys in this first-team defense, you got Harold Perkins at LSU. We would agree he's a great player. You've got Kool-Aid McKinstry at Alabama. I'm not quite so sure I agree with that one necessarily, but go ahead and put him on there if you want to. When you look at the second-team defense from the SEC, then you start getting some Georgia guys here. Mikael Williams is on there. Jamon Dumas-Johnson's on there. Malachi Stark is on there. I don't have any problem with any of those guys whatsoever. But let me tell you who don't see. And I, by the way, I called this a couple of months ago. I told you a month or so ago, the most underrated player on the Georgia roster right now. We did a show about this. I think maybe one of my vacation shows. We did a show about this. The most underrated player on the Georgia roster right now might be Smile Mondon. People have no idea how good Mondon is. Mondon, with all due respect to Juwan Dumas-Johnson, is every bit as good as Pop is. The guy they call Pop, sometimes we call him JDJ. Smile Mondon is right there with him. I don't think you can think of one without thinking of the other. Yet Dumas-Johnson seems to be a little bit more known right now than Smile Mondon. So if you're looking at, hey, who's going to emerge, play at sort of an all-American level that allows Georgia to compete for a national championship, I think Mondon's one of the easiest names to kind of point out there. I think it's good they recognize Mikael Williams. I think Juwan Dumas-Johnson, where that discussion, you say, well, who else is going to emerge here? Who else is going to step to the forefront? Maybe it's a guy like Kamari Lass for the cornerback spot. I think the Georgia defensive line this season is going to probably remind you a little bit of what it was in 2021. I realize that's kind of high cotton because, Devontae and Jordan became first-round picks, and Trayvon Walker was the number 1 overall pick. But this year's defensive line, I think, also gives you a potential chance for some of those all-American level players to emerge there too. So the point is, right now, Georgia isn't actually as well represented on the preseason All-American list as you might expect a national champion to be. But the same thing's been true the last couple of years in the preseason, and we've seen guys step to the forefront during the season. That's apparently going to need to happen for this Georgia team again this year as well. Let's transition here to the subject of recruiting here for a moment, where Alabama got an interesting recruiting win here with a 2025 in-state offensive lineman Mason Short. Short making his commitment to Alabama. I think we even have a graphic I'll show you here of Short coming out of the Evans program there in the Augusta area of Georgia, making his commitment to Alabama. And so what this kind of leads you to believe is that, hey, Alabama on the field after losing 2 games a year ago in the regular season, at least in the present tense, who knows what the future holds, but in the present tense, on the field, Alabama seems to have slipped by a peg or two, losing a couple of games, kind of outside the playoff discussion here this year. But when it comes to recruiting, Alabama once again had a great class here for the class of 2023, and also still doing some long-term future work here with a guy like Short, who I think a lot of folks really like. Alabama still is a big factor in recruiting. So for those who, and listen, we've talked about this ourselves, who sort of expect, Nick Saban to slow down and, maybe Saban kind of in the winter of his career, honesty compels you to admit, the evidence of that in the recruiting, not necessarily as tangible, that Alabama's still getting recruiting wins, including a long-range win for a guy like Short. So Alabama picks up a recruiting win here over the weekend. And then finally, congratulations to LSU for winning the women's basketball national championship. There was some controversy around this game, which frankly I'm not that interested in, about the officiating and this and that, and at the end the allegations of taunting because of some of the John Cena "you can't see me" stuff that had been done during the tournament. I'm frankly not interested in any of that. I am interested in this though. Kim Mulkey is the coach at LSU. She's the one that leads them to a title. Mulkey, also a national championship coach at Baylor. And to me, this is another example of LSU athletic director Scott Woodward. He's had a real, doctrine in place when it comes to making a coaching hire. Woodward's goal always seems to be, let's overspend if necessary, and let's go out and hire the biggest name available to fill our coaching ranks. That's what he did when he was athletic director at Texas A&M, hiring Jimbo Fisher. You can say that hasn't worked out very well, but he has stuck with that plan for almost every coaching hire he's made. Let's go out, spend big, overspend if needed, but we're going to bring in the biggest name possible and kind of roll the dice there with kind of a proven commodity. In the case of Brian Kelly at LSU, football coach, it seems like that's working out okay. They obviously won the SEC West this year. In the case of Mulkey, famous in the circles of that sport for the success she had at Baylor, once again, it works out. LSU's the women's basketball national champion. And so this is one of those things kind of keep in mind in the future, is that, there's different ways to go out there and make coaching hires. Some athletic directors like the idea of finding the diamond in the rough. Some athletic directors like the idea of kind of finding the up-and-coming person. But in the case of Woodward, his plan has been, hey, who's the biggest name I can hire, and let me spend whatever money I need to go out there and do that. It's not the most efficient thing financially speaking, because in the case of Jimbo Fisher, it appears they've overspent at Texas A&M. That Woodward was in place with that hire. But at LSU, that doctrine has sort of worked out pretty well. So something to keep in mind, especially if you're an athletic department who thinks you might be making some coaching hires in the very near future. And we will make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. As we wrap up here today, we'll give you a couple of golden shoes. Of course, over the weekend, April 1st rolled around. That's April Fool's Day. So on the social medium that you prefer, you may have seen plenty of UGA-themed April Fool's jokes. We'll show you one of these here that came to me. Phil Underwood shared this. He says, ESPN reports that Georgia Stetson Bennett granted an extra year of eligibility. His 1 year at Jones Community College was not counted against his NCAA-eligible time, so Stetson's withdrawn from the NFL draft. He's going to participate in spring practice football drills on Tuesday. I got to say, as April Fool's type jokes go, that's not a bad one from Phil there. So pretty good. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. And by the way, speaking of golden shoes, we'll also give one there as well. A lot of dog fans right now enjoying these Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, including Bubba, who writes in to me to say that we are going to be cruising on Independence of the Seas second week in June. Any way we could know who are the other fellow dogs who might be on board. Might be fun to hang out and call the dogs while at sea. So if you're going to be on Independence of the Seas on that second week in June, let me know so we can let Bubba know. Dog fans wanting to hang out on Royal Caribbean cruise ships together. That sounds like a plan to me. So, Bubba, we'll try to do right by you on that and give you a golden shoe as well for your support of Royal Caribbean and your enjoyment on Independence of the Seas coming up in June. So that's great to see there, too. And by the way, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, how about a Gator Hater countdown? 208 days from now, Georgia back in Jacksonville. It might be the final time. Beating up on those lousy, stinking Gators. We'll make that our Gator Hater countdown. We'll see all of you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. Big shout out to our friend Kaylee Manziel, kind of manning the ship by herself today. Michael Carville on vacation, Kaylee in for Michael, and she's doing a great job. So we certainly appreciate that. Let me go to YouTube first here. We'll get some comments there, and we'll kind of roll through a Monday on all of that. For those of you enjoying a spring break week, hope you're having a great time and got big plans. And thanks for taking DawgNation Daily with you on whatever plans you might have. LK says, any update on Dom Blaylock? Is he still in the portal? Yes, he still is. The expectation I have is that he's not coming back to Georgia. If we hear something on Blaylock, it's likely to be after May 1st when that portal kind of thing opens back up again. We may then hear about where Blaylock's going. I would expect that we would. It's kind of funny, though. Georgia has Dominic Lovett now, and they call him Dom. And so a lot of times, you hear Kirby talking about Dom this and Dom that, and it kind of takes me back to Dominic Blaylock, and I have to kind of remind myself, wait, this is a different Dom now. So I kind of find myself getting drawn off sides by that at times with Georgia. But in this particular case, the former Dom at Georgia, Dominic Blaylock, it certainly seems like he's heading to a new football destination, and I'm guessing we'll hear about that when the portal opens up again in May, because right now you can't go anywhere. So for whatever reason, the timing wasn't quite right for him to announce anything with the previous portal window, so that could come up with this upcoming portal window here. Frank Patterson, the subject of Kirby Smart on the Coach K podcast. I heard about that, but I hadn't got a chance to hear it yet. I will go check it out because, listen, Kirby is always very good when he talks to other coaches. Kirby's just a coach's coach. And so while Coach K, I think of as a very different kind of person than Kirby Smart, my guess is that's probably a very good conversation. I'm guessing we probably will hear some of that on the show. Frank, thanks for the recommendation on that. Let's see what else. Taylor Russell says, I like Blaylock a lot. I hope he does well moving forward. Yeah, Dominic is an example. Dominic Blaylock is an example of a guy that I just think is kind of set back by injuries. Blaylock coming out of high school, that Walton program, deep high school program. I mean, he was as exciting a player to watch as existed in the state, I think. Did a lot of Wildcat quarterback for them, but it was also a traditional wide receiver too, and just a thrilling player to watch. And, that version of him at Georgia, I don't know that we ever got to see. Blaylock just dealt with a lot of injuries, a couple of very serious knee injuries, and that just really does something to your career, unfortunately. Jonathan Aaron says, if you're in the ninth inning, you have to give the ball to one person for going back to the Braves. Is it John Rocker or Craig Kimbrell? Kimbrell's one of those guys that when he was on at his best, I don't know that anyone's done it better than him. Now, closers are also the kind of thing where when they lose it, they just sort of lose it. So I believe I'd take Kimbrell there. I mean, admittedly, Rocker's performance in the 99 NLCS was amazing against a really pretty good Mets lineup. But Kimbrell at his very best, and I think his very best lasted longer, was probably the most dominant that I've seen. So I believe I'm going to go Kimbrell right there. Frank Patterson also giving some credit to Mark Wohlers, who, by the way, still lives in the Atlanta area. Wohlers for that 95 World Series there, too. Greg Deloach asked about the Adam Anderson situation. I believe the Anderson trial may have started, I believe. Sometimes the wheels of justice sort of spin kind of slow, and I guess that's been one of those things there, and I'm assuming that's just normal. We obviously don't pay attention to a lot of legal type stuff unless it involves somebody in sports. But I believe the Anderson trial may have started. Some of y'all may know more about this than I do. But for a while we heard nothing. But I believe that trial is kind of starting. Spencer Clark says Roderick Robinson's created buzz, the running back position. Another great freshman. Yeah, listen, I think that Roderick Robinson had a great finish to his high school career, and one of the reasons why I think a lot of people are really excited about him is because of what he was able to do there. Frank Patterson, the subject of Nick Saban and Jermaine Burton. Yeah, I think a lot of Alabama people, and I think Nick Saban himself, thought that they were so good at cultivating wide receivers, they could just bring anybody in, have that guy kind of fall into what had been a typical level of success for Alabama wide receivers. But it's one thing to go out and get a guy like Jamison Williams from Ohio State who really wasn't playing. I mean, Williams was an elite level receiver, but he just happened to be on a program at Ohio State, which we'll give full credit to, having nothing but elite level receivers. So it's not like Alabama developed Jamison Williams. They just benefited from the fact that Williams got tired of waiting at Ohio State. But in the case of Jermaine Burton, he was playing at Georgia, and Burton was a good player, but probably something below the great threshold. I think Alabama thought, well, if you're good at Georgia, you'll be great here. And that's obviously a level of hubris that has not served that program well. MG on the subject of Nyland Green. It sounds like Nyland Green's had a pretty good spring. David Daniel Sisavana as well. It sounds like the competition for Georgia defensive backs has been pretty good. You assume Kamari Lassiter's going to start at cornerback. You assume Malachi Stark's going to start at safety. Javon Bullard's going to start somewhere, be it nickel or safety. And then you get a safety spot that's open for competition and a cornerback spot that's open for competition. And it sounds like the competition's been pretty good. Wait, is Roderick Robinson Little Big O? That's kind of funny. That's kind of funny because Robinson, I guess Roderick Robinson's wearing 0 for Georgia now. Somebody, Frank Patterson calls him Little Big O. That's kind of funny. That's pretty funny. All right, let me go back to DawgNation.com, then I'll go to Facebook after that. Johnny Surf Dog says Kirby Smart's the new king of college football. I would agree with that. Roger W. says Kirby's going to use this snub on the SEC and All-American preseason list. Maybe so, as extra motivation. Maybe so. But it's also just an example of this is just what Georgia is. And it's kind of funny. Georgia is a team concept team. We all understand that. But at the same time, you've got to have elite players. You have to have talented players performing at an elite level. And Georgia's had no shortage of that, even though preseason-wise, for the last couple of years, they just haven't really been acknowledged that way. But when it comes to the postseason conversation, if you're not acknowledged that way, that means you didn't win enough games. So more than anything, this is just an example of, as opposed to, okay, it's a snub, so therefore you use it as motivation, what it really ends up being is an example of what Georgia just does, of if you trust the process, not to use an overused phrase, but if you trust this process here, even if your overall stat line isn't as exciting as you want it to be, eventually you'll get the attention you're supposed to get. Now, Joe Moore Award, things like that, they don't ever seem to pay attention, but Roger Goodell pays attention because he's calling these Georgia players' names on Thursday night of the NFL draft, which ultimately matters the most of anything. Ken Holcomb says we have 3 good quarterbacks, and I have all the confidence in the world that coaches Smart and Bobo will pick the one that gives the best chance of winning. Way too early to be speculating right now, though. Go Dogs. Yeah, I think that's true. And Kirby Smart has said plenty of times he believes that Georgia has 3 good quarterbacks. I believe that there as well. And what Georgia has is the luxury of taking this into the season if it wants to. Now, I don't prefer to be an overly cynical person. I don't prefer to be that way. But if you wanted to be the most cynical person in the world, you would say that the way in which the quarterback conversations being discussed right now is exactly the way it would be discussed if you were trying to keep Brock Vandagriff from transferring. So I guess if you want to be overly cynical, you could say, hey, the seeming emergence of Vandagriff and the fact that Vandagriff's being treated, in a category kind of above Gunnar Stockton, who's younger than him, and sort of being treated as a guy who's really pushing for a chance to win the starting job. Because of all the quarterbacks, if Beck were to win the starting quarterback job, you would assume that Vandagriff more likely to transfer than Stockton would be. I don't think that Gunnar Stockton is going to transfer. I don't even think he's considering it. But Vandagriff might consider it because of the fact that Vandagriff's now been here for a couple of years, and if he loses out to Beck, then you maybe think, well, my best chance of playing time may be somewhere else. So if you wanted to be as cynical as you possibly could be, then you would say, well, the discussion right now would seem to be, setting things up so that maybe Vandagriff's not thinking about that. But I would say the more likely chance is, the more likely situation is that Vandagriff really is performing very well. And then he really has made a name for himself, and then he really has taken his time in the program and used it to good service here in preparing him to be a legitimate competitor for this job. PDT says, would you rather have a quarterback that throws interceptions but can line up a team more fluent, or a quarterback that isn't quite as fluent with the playbook yet is smarter with the ball? He says straight 8 and 28. So here's something I believe, and this is one of those things that I have kind of formulated from talking to coaches. Coaches have convinced me of this. That I had a coach tell me one time, and this is like a big time coach, like a famous coach. He told me, and I'll always remember this. He said, the thing that I judge quarterbacks on more than anything else is their willingness to throw it into a tight window. Will you do that? Some quarterbacks just won't do it. There's an equivalent of this for those of you that are involved in baseball, where, hey, a lot of baseball scouts, one of the first things they're looking to judge about a pitcher is when a pitcher faces a big-time batter, a professional level hitter, will you even throw it over the plate? There are a lot of pitching prospects that disqualify themselves because all they want to do is nibble. They want to kind of come close to the black, the outside edge of the plate. They want to kind of come close to the black, but they won't put it over the plate. They don't trust their stuff. They don't trust their location well enough to put it over the plate. And they disqualify themselves as pitching prospects because when facing a professional level hitter, a hitter who is also a prospect, they just simply won't throw the ball over the plate. And that eliminates them from discussion. Well, I had a coach going to tell me something similar about the quarterback spot, which is there are a lot of quarterbacks who just don't trust their stuff enough to throw it between a cornerback and a safety to a receiver. And this coach told me, this is the thing that matters to me more than anything else. And I have taken that to heart. And I have taken it so hard to say that you may notice this, and this sounds crazy because this kind of goes against what a lot of times you hear. I actually don't make that big of a deal about interceptions. The idea that you've got to avoid the interception at all costs. I don't make that big of a deal about that because, as I said before, there is a way of playing mistake-free football that also doesn't create enough opportunities for you to contribute to winning. That if you're a quarterback, you got to make plays. And the cost of throwing the ball into tight windows, the cost of making something happen is occasionally the ball's going to bounce the wrong way, or you're just going to miss your target and you might have an interception. So when it comes to evaluating quarterbacks, I think the idea of avoiding interceptions is a little bit overrated. Now, you can't throw too many picks. We all understand that. But show me a quarterback who never throws an interception. I may also show you the same quarterback, who's not making enough plays either. Randy Hall says, anyone's a surprise starter for this season? Well, right now the most likely surprise starter is Austin Blaske, right? I'd say that's the most likely example of that. I would also say that I think a lot of people who kind of participate in these kinds of conversations may have assumed that Dalen Everett was the easy name to kind of pencil in at starter at cornerback opposite Kamari Lassiter. And it sounds like, guys like Nyland Green and even Julian Humphrey are making that more of a real competition. So I don't know if we end up having a surprise winner, but I would say that competition's been pretty intense thus far. Johnny Surf Dog says the silence out of Gator Nation's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of things going on for the good thus far during Florida spring practice. I don't think so. Let me go to Facebook yet because I haven't been there yet, and I apologize for that. On Facebook. Let's see what's going on. Kent Holcomb says Vandergriff has said he will graduate from UGA. Does anyone know how close he is to graduate? I think he's pretty close. I think he's very, very close. Ryan Walker says Carson Beck's going to be as good for Georgia as Dan Marino was in '82 for Pitt. He said he literally has escapability, a rifle arm, and can make plays. So Ryan giving quite an endorsement to Carson Beck there. Kaylee Mansell on Facebook says thoughts about Kim Mulkey's coaching outfits. So I don't mind a little bit of flair. I don't mind that. Kaylee does not like it, and I understand why. I mean, she looks like she should have been at WrestleMania. Got this like gold, like these shiny outfits. But as someone who likes wrestling, I don't mind you having a little bit of a shtick. I don't mind you having a gimmick. That style's not for me necessarily, but I don't mind that. Let's see what else. Did y'all see the outfits that Kaylee's talking about? They were wild. I mean, some of these are really wild. Bill Sanders, Philip Jordan Wells talking about the Masters. I had a chance on Saturday. I've mentioned with some of our audience a little earlier. Michael Carvel gave me passes to go to the Augusta National Women's Amateur. Had a chance to walk the course a little bit. That was great. Super fun. Super fun. Let's see what else. Ryan Walker and John Gilder, I was talking about. Beck won Mr. Florida football in the 8A division there. Carried Mandarin to a state championship. Was the number one quarterback coming out of the state of Florida and set passing records. Yeah, his junior year was huge. I guess senior year didn't quite have as much talent around him or whatever, but he had a huge junior year, big junior year. Let's see what else. Greg Childer says 4 touchdowns and 2 picks is the same as 2 touchdowns and no picks. You're still plus 14. It's the threat that opens up the running game. They can't put the 8 in the box. That is, I think, a good way to think about that, which is, hey, if you show as a quarterback your willingness and your ability to make plays, you do soften things up for the running game. We talked about it with Jake Fromm last Tuesday. That's a good point. Emery Waller checking in to say go Dogs. Appreciate that, Emery. Let's see what else is going on here. Gary Strickland says we all make mistakes. How quickly can you learn, come back, and capitalize on them? Go Dogs. Yeah, Gary, that's right. And when it comes to quarterback position, it's how you perform in the face of the potential for mistake that matters. It's one thing to kind of have a little bit of a false bravado, but it's another thing to kind of be able to maintain that composure. Kirby Smart kind of talked about the Full Metal Jacket thing. If you know the movie from the 80s, this idea that you're being trained for this and kind of keeping that composure when you go out there and not just kind of letting it, I guess the analogy is supposed to be of, kind of freezing up when you kind of get into a kind of a combat situation type thing. That ability to kind of stay confident when there is plenty of reason to be nervous and anxious, that's what a good quarterback's going to be able to do. Let's see what else. Somebody said, I hope we keep all 3 quarterbacks. I think right now, Georgia's probably in a good position to be able to do that. Barry Watkins says, I blame BA for his Roman. He's about to take some time off. That gave me false hope. Hold on, but I'm not the one. This is going back to WrestleMania topic. I'm not the one that said Roman Reigns going to take some time off. I think somebody else said that. Didn't somebody else say that? One of our commenters said that Roman was going to take some time off? And I just repeated that. I mean, what the internet says is that, and I believe this, there might be some truth to this. Obviously WWE sold this weekend to whatever company, the same company that owns UFC. But Vince McMahon, I guess, is still a part of this. That McMahon was just not going to let an AEW wrestler win the main event of WrestleMania. When it's all said and done, that's probably true. That's what the internet thinks. I think that's probably true. Bill Sanders says now that, moving forward, they've kind of lost the moment. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to give the moment to Cody, that was the moment to give. I thought the match was really good, and I kept thinking it was building to what was likely to be a Cody win. I'm telling you, when the finish happened, I was very surprised. Very surprised. I was very surprised. And I guess, I still thought the weekend itself was pretty good for wrestling. I thought the actual match was really good between those two, although I was very surprised by the outcome. Enrique Isidro on the subject of quarterback says, what's important with quarterbacks aside from the metrics is what's behind the eyes, in between the ears. Yeah, I mean, it's just a really hard thing to be able to do. And, there's a moment in which the team has to borrow the quarterback's confidence. And so if that confidence is limited, or as we've talked about with Jake Fromm before, if it's phony, that's the kind of thing that I just think sets up a team for a disaster if that quarterback doesn't have real, measurable, tangible self-confidence, belief in himself, trust in his ability to navigate where it's going to go, because the team wants to feed off that. And if it's false and it's phony, then the team that wants to feed off that confidence is ultimately going to starve. DMart42 says that's the blue-collar version of Bryce Young, where you have to have grit and grind for everything. Bryce came in on the pedigree, and he's special in the pocket and anticipation, but otherwise, so DMart, talking back to the quarterback situation. Yeah, so in the case of Stetson Bennett, this is the one thing I think that we now see that the Georgia team saw for a long time, which is that the thing that allowed Bennett to emerge at Georgia was that he was confident. In other words, you go back and look at the Arkansas game in 2020 when Georgia was losing that day at the half to Arkansas and could have lost the game, but Stetson Bennett came in. We're led to believe that prior to that, he wasn't really practicing with the thought of playing very much. This is a guy they just sort of tabbed, put him in the game, and he went in, saved Georgia's bacon that day there at Arkansas. It takes a level of confidence to be able to do that. And a lot of the Georgia players kind of bought into Stetson pretty early because he had a lot of confidence in himself. We all see that now, and in some respects, some people sort of think that's a confidence that sort of borders on a cockiness that not everybody really likes about Bennett now. But Bennett was never, some people don't mind it, but some people do. Bennett was never the kind of aw shucks, golly gee whiz, just happy to be here sort of walk-on that people expected him to be. Bennett, in his own mind, was never Georgia's version of Rudy. In Bennett's mind, everybody was an idiot for not realizing how good he was. He always felt that way about himself. And while, that level of sort of swagger and confidence is a turnoff for some people, it caused the team to want to buy into him. And that's why when Bennett got his chance to play, he, kind of stepped to the forefront, just because he truly had a legitimate, tangible, authentic level of confidence. Let's see what else. And also, by the way, I think that Bryce Young had his own version of that. Young's just one of those guys that was a very cool customer. It's one of the reasons why, if I'm making NFL draft evaluation, I like Bryce Young, and I like him more than most of the other quarterbacks in that draft. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark says Stetson's the standard at quarterback at Georgia. He's a living legend. Yeah, big shoes to fill, no doubt, for this next Georgia quarterback, for sure. For sure. Jonathan Aaron says, what did you think about the Edge Finn Balor match? I mean, as Hell in a Cell matches go, I thought it was, not as good as some of the best have been, but I've always been an Edge fan, so I kind of liked the match. I thought we were going to have a little bit of an issue there because, Balor was bleeding at the beginning of the match. WWE won't show blood anymore. You couldn't probably tell it too much because he had his face all painted up anyway. But, there was real blood. This was a real thing. Balor got cut. And so I thought, was this going to, because right before that, you had the Shane McMahon thing where he tore up his knee. So it's like, there's some very real stuff kind of creeping into WrestleMania for a minute here. But they got they got Balor's cut 10-2. And I thought it was a pretty good match. Two good guys, obviously very capable, some good spots in that. And, I like Edge, so I like the match. Let's see what else. Fred Gunn giving you a good Dusty Rhodes impersonation in print there. I like to see that. That's good to see. The one WrestleMania match I did not get to see that I wanted to see, I just was running around doing stuff. I didn't get to see the Brock Lesnar. Is it almost at the big guy's name? I didn't get to see the match between Lesnar and the big guy. I'd like to have seen that. That's to me kind of a classic WrestleMania match. I saw the highlight on social media of Lesnar giving the suplexes, but I didn't see the actual match itself. Paul Moon says, I only see 2 first-round quarterbacks in this class, Bryce Young and CJ. Gun to my head, I'd go with Bryce, but CJ's a great option. I'd take Stead over AR and Levis too, but that's not going to happen. Yeah, Bennett will not be drafted ahead of those quarterbacks, but I truly believe that Bennett's chances of being successful in the NFL are about as good as both Levis and Richardson's are, if not better. In the case of Richardson, certainly. I've been down this road many times, and I realize these NFL guys get paid to do this, so they're not going to they're certainly not making their selections with the idea of being wrong. But I'm just telling you right now, if you weren't good in college, I don't know how you could assume that person's going to be good in the NFL. And Anthony Richardson just wasn't good in college. Levis was okay at times in 2021, but even he's just not spectacular enough to me in terms of the actual on-field production. I'm not talking about the physique because I don't care about that. There have been plenty of great quarterbacks who had no physique to speak of whatsoever. The idea that Levis is kind of cut up like a professional wrestler, that's relatively meaningless to me. It just is. That is not a position where that kind of body definition has mattered. It just hasn't. If anything, it may be a distraction. If you're that busy working on your body, are you working on the playbook? I'd rather have a little less muscle definition and a little bit more statistical dominance at the college level. I'm not a fan of Will Levis either. But CJ and Bryce I do like. CJ Stroud I would certainly expect to be an NFL level starter. In the case of Bryce Young, there's a chance he's a star. That's my thought there on that. Let me go back around the other. Foster Moss. Yeah, so brings up Snoop Dogg. So Snoop Dogg, with the thing with Miz last night, that came on the heels of Shane McMahon getting hurt. And like Snoop Dogg, who's not a professional wrestler, like he just stepped in and saved the day after McMahon got legitimately hurt. He tore up his knee. Like that storyline was meant to go a lot different than it did, obviously. And I mean, Snoop Dogg just improv'd on a dime. I thought that was one of the most impressive things of the whole weekend. The fact that he realized that whatever story they were trying to tell was going to have to be a little bit different, and I'm sure the same finish was set to work up, but he just went right to it, and it worked out very well. So I thought Snoop Dogg was one of the MVPs of the night last night. Philip Jordan Wells says the Braves are on ESPN Plus. Is that true? 2 of 3 in Washington, by the way. St. Louis tonight. Let's see what else. Ryan Walker says he's got to hunker down, finish up some work. So, Ryan, we appreciate you checking in for sure. Daryl McDaniel says either Carter or Nolan to the Falcons. They're going to have their chance maybe. And I'm like everybody else. If Jalen falls to Atlanta and they don't select him, I guess if they were to take Nolan instead, that's different. But if Jalen's there and Atlanta doesn't select him, that may be the last straw for some people. If they haven't had a last straw, that may be the last straw. Let's see what else. Final comments, get ready to go. Philip Clark doesn't have the Bally. Yeah, this is one of those things where, like I think I said this on Friday, like we still have like traditional cable. So we're kind of old school in that respect. And I guess come baseball season, I'm glad that I do. Johnny Surf Dog says that's a great point about quarterbacks' willingness to throw to try to make a play. That was my biggest complaint about Dave Green. He says he was a check down, Charlie mistake of order. I don't know that I fully agree with that about Green. I thought that Green did make some big plays at Georgia. But I thought he made some very big plays at Georgia. But overall, that willingness of a quarterback to do that's what really matters to me. Let's see what else. Bill Russell says the idea that both lines of scrimmage are going to dominate is very exciting. Yeah, I mean, if you're a non-Georgia fan, you want the Georgia dominance to come to an end. Obviously, what you're hoping for is that Georgia will have some give back on the lines of scrimmage, and that may not be the case this year on either side. Randy Hall disappointed to lose Mason Short. Yes, Short's a guy that I had kind of paid attention to a little bit. I mean, the one thing you got to say about Alabama is they still recruit. Who knows what they are on the field. As I told you before, I don't know that I hear a ton coming out of Alabama spring practice right now. But they do still recruit. You got to give them credit for that. Chase White, D. Mart talking about Caleb Williams. I don't know how I feel about Caleb. I mean, Caleb's obviously a very good college quarterback. I don't really quite know how I feel about Caleb Williams. If you were to give me CJ or Bryce, I believe I'd take either one of them over Caleb Williams, I believe. Maybe I changed my mind this year, but I'm not as high on Caleb Williams. I mean, he's obviously a very good player, and he's a Heisman Trophy winner. But if you want to kind of compare quarterbacks over, multiple years, I don't know that I put Caleb into the Bryce Young category. I don't think anyway. All right, anything else before we go here today? Final comments. Johnny Surfdog says this season's unique and that our team really needs to be prepared for November and beyond. September and October can be used for development. I think that's true. I think that Kirby Smart would probably prefer there to be a little bit more of a test early. I think obviously we know Kirby wanted to play the game against Oklahoma. We know that. If you really wanted to try to, kind of sort of push the envelope here, and this is, I'm probably exaggerating a little bit. Can you make a case of the road game at Auburn being a big deal for Georgia? I don't really know what Auburn quarterback looks like right now, but, I do believe that Hugh Freeze is going to be an impact coach there. I do believe that Freeze is going to have some success eventually. Is there enough of a roster in place to make that a dangerous road game at the end of the month of September, beginning of October for Georgia, whichever date it is? Probably not, but that may be as close as we get prior to that Tennessee game in November. You're right about that. Finally, anything else on Facebook before we go? Greg Childers says the best is yet to come for Georgia defenses. I believe that's true. What Georgia has, kind of lined up with the future defensively is really pretty amazing. It really is. Ben Green says the Falcons need to understand that if they draft 5 dogs every year in 5 or so years, they'll win 5 Super Bowls. Yeah, I mean, listen, that's what Georgia teams do. They produce championships, and then those players go on to the NFL, and they participate in championship-type teams there too. So if Atlanta wants to get involved in that, all they got to do that is just draft more UGA players. Ben, I think you bring up a really good point with that. All right, let's go for now. Speaking of Atlanta, you can check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online, ajc.com. You can find out everything, including the basketball championship is tonight. Masters Week, AJC always has big coverage of that. You can read that online, ajc.com. Hawks got a win against the Mavericks. It's amazing. Like Atlanta is, as the kids say, like the most mid team there is, like basically 500. I saw John Hollinger had this tweet last night. They've essentially scored and allowed the same number of points. It's just crazy. Like everything they've done this year is like right down the middle, 50-50. So that's about what they are. Also, 5 observations from the Braves first weekend. More good than not. Yesterday, not a very good day. Murphy looks like a really nice fit at catcher, though. That's certainly something to point out. And also some really fun stuff going around the Atlanta area this April. So you can read about all of that online at ajc.com. Also, R.S. Andrews. They bring the cool down to you. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that, including getting your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can find them online at rsandrews.com for that. It only costs $99, and it'll keep you nice and cool and comfortable all spring and summer long. So rsandrews.com for more on that. We'll see you all back here tomorrow 9:45 for our first and 15. That's on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody.